After understanding all the concepts like renderer 2 and dependency injection, we are now in a position to understand what custom directives are. Directives we have seen in the last session, wherein we saw there are three types: structural, attribute and custom directives. And this session will dedicatedly have on custom directives. Components are called as custom directives. So you know what components are. Components are called as custom directives, but they have all the features of directives. Above that, they have view with HTML that is injected into DOM. So the difference between a component and a directive or a custom directive is that this has a HTML or view, whereas directive doesn't have a HTML and view. As directives doesn't have a view, they do not have the view and content lifecycle hooks. If you see the lifecycle hooks of Angular, and any of the image, you see these four are a bit different when compared to these four. The reason is they are with content and view. They handle or deal with the view part. When a directive doesn't have a view or a HTML of its own, these four lifecycle hooks do not apply to a directive. The other four lifecycle hooks are applied to a directive. So these are the only four lifecycle hooks that are applied to a component only, and these four lifecycle hooks are applied to a directive. Altogether 8 lifecycle hooks are applied to a component, and a directive take only these 4 lifecycle hooks. The reason is these 4 lifecycle hooks deal with the view part, and the directive do not have a view, so these 4 lifecycles will never apply to a directive. As directives can be created using this command ng generate d for directive and a name for it. Directives can hold instructions that execute when an event happens on an HTML element on which a directive is applied. So you create a directive and you apply that directive to a HTML element, and when an event happens, this directive comes into picture. As mentioned, directive is a decorator which can be applied to a class along with additional metadata. So let's create a directive using Angular CLI and we'll see the usage. Creating a custom directive using Angular CLI. I come into the source and app, and here I can create a directive, or I say mkdir and directives, and I come into this. In this I'll say ng generate directive dir1. Press enter. Okay, the directive got created, and also you see the app module.ts got updated. You see, as I said initially, declarations is an array wherein you have all the components that you are in need of, or the components that you have created, or the root component. This is an array wherein you list components and directives, and this happens automatically because of Angular CLI. Now we have a directive. Now let's start using this directive. I'll open the directive first of all. I'll say dir1, and this coming from, so components and directives, and I'll open the directive now. Directive TypeScript. Yes. Now let's use this directive along with the component 1. And directive, as I said, is almost same as a component. Again, three things: you have an import, you have a decorator, and then you have a class. Three things as it is in a component. And the difference is, if you see the selector or the decorator, you have selector for a component, you have a selector for a directive, whereas you have a URL and a styles URL given for a component, but for a directive you don't have those two. View and styling is not applicable to a directive. View and styling are applicable to a component. That's the difference between a directive and a component. And let's apply this to the component 1. For that, I'll create an element like P, and I say this is a para tag, and I'll save it. For now you don't see anything major, and this is a para tag as expected. And to this, if I want to apply the directive, I need to say selector app dir1, and I say app dir1. Okay, now I'll save this. Again, for the moment you don't see any change as of now, but in directive what I can do is I'll have the element ref and in ng on init of the directive I say on init, and I say ng on init, in which I'll say this dot element ref dot native element dot. Let's see what this means here. I can do the console log and let's see what the output is till now. So in console you see this is the para tag that is given in component 1, and I'm now able to print it in directive. So I'll copy this and I'll comment this one. Native element dot, I say style dot background color is red, and if I save it, you see when I apply this directive to a HTML tag, I get the background color applied, and if I don't apply the directive, the HTML element will be as usual. So a directive when created that has some logic in it, and if I apply that directive to a control, to a HTML element, I'm indirectly applying this directive's logic to the HTML element, and this is where the usage of directive comes. So we saw how this HTML element can be accessed in directive using element ref. The same thing can be achieved using renderer 2 also. For that I'll get renderer 2, I'll say private renderer of type renderer 2, and in here I'll comment this for now, and this all we saw it as an example of element ref example, and now we'll have renderer 2 and element ref example. So in here what I'll do is I'll say this dot renderer dot, we have set element style, In this I'll pass this dot element ref dot native element comma and background color is blue. Let's save this. Set element style is not a function, so might be some mistake. Set style, okay. Now save it. You see? So it's not nothing new in here. It's the same thing. In this example, I was simply using element ref, and in this example, I'm using renderer2, and this is the safe way of performing DOM manipulations. Whenever you are supposed to perform or do a change on DOM, it's better and recommended to use renderer2, and that helps you in doing the DOM operations safely. A host listener is used to capture the events that happen on an HTML element like this, on which the custom directive is applied. So whenever an event happens on this HTML element, and because we have applied a custom directive, those events can be captured using host listener. I'll be using host listener, and I'll pass an event like, let the event be mouse enter, and when this is the case, I call a method mouse enter, and I'll simply have a console log for the moment event. I'll save it. Now come over here and clear this. For this I did not apply the custom directive. For this I applied the custom directive, and because the mouse the mouse has entered, I get this event. Again, if I get my mouse over there, if my mouse enters this element, I get the event raised. Okay, now we can perform some more manipulations like this dot renderer dot, I say set style, and in which I say this dot element ref dot native element, to which I do the background color change to blue. So when this event mouse enter event happens, now what do you expect? See, likewise I'll have another host listener in which I'll pass event as mouse leave, and when this is the case, I'll call mouse leave method, and again I'll use the same thing, this dot renderer dot set style, and I'll pass this dot element ref dot native element, and to the background color let's change it to something like white, and save it. Now if you see, so this kind of effect you can achieve using a directive. All this logic will be applied to every HTML element on which I place app dir, the directive. For the moment, this para tag 2 has nothing on it, but If I apply the directive and save it, now you see, so this is how you can achieve such effects using directives, or any programming logic that you apply in that you write in directive. If you apply it to a HTML element, it gets into execution. Along with host listener, you also see another decorator called as host binding. If you see host binding, what host binding is, it simplifies the code that we have written. In this I'll say the style dot background color, and I'll declare a variable my color of type string equal to, let us start with white initially, and now I don't need all this stuff. I'll simply remove it and I say this dot my color equal to blue, and again over here when this event happens, I don't need all this dot my color equal to white. Let's save it. Let's save everything, and you see the same thing happening now. So it's using host binding, you can shorten your code.